So I just got around to watching the second round of the MotoGP World Championship, and this was one of the more bizarre but also fantastic races that I've sort of ever watched. So I'm going to tell you why that is now. So this race already got off to an odd start before the race itself had actually begun. So what happened was it had been raining before the race start, and the majority, in fact all of them except pole position holder Jack Miller, were on the grid on wet tyres and Jack Miller was on slicks, and they all decided to change their mind and come into the pits to change to slick tyres. So what ended up happening was it was the most bizarre thing. All of the riders except Jack Miller took their bikes back into the pit lane. So Jack Miller is sitting on pole position on a completely empty grid. And it got even stranger because then all of the riders that did change to slicks had to have a handicap. Their grid position got handicapped. So Jack Miller ended up sitting about 4 or 5 rows in front of everyone else. I'll put an image up. It's the strangest looking grid I've ever seen. And then just as it looked like this madness was going to get underway, Marc Marquez, the current champion, 4-time champion of the sport, stalls his bike on the grid, and what occurs next is he moves forward. He's trying to bump start his bike, and the officials are telling him to move into the pit lane. They're telling him he has to start in the pit lane, but Marquez pretty much ignores these guys and drives the wrong way down the grid and moves back into his grid slot, and then the race gets underway and Marquez steams to the front. He's pretty much the best rider in the field by quite a long shot, so he pretty quickly, from rows back from Jack Miller, overtakes everyone that was in front of him. He started from 6th or 7th place, I believe, so he overtook 5 bikes, then caught up to Jack Miller, and then took the lead of the race. And then the officials, quite rightly, I think, gave him a ride-through penalty for the action of moving back to his grid when he should have been in the pit lane. So then he was demoted to 19th place. An Australian, Jack Miller, retook the lead again. And this race was quite fantastic to watch because, and all MotoGP races are, if you don't watch this sport regularly, you need to be watching it, because what occurred for the rest of the race was a 4-way battle for the lead between Jack Miller, Johann Zarco, who was one of the more exciting prospects in MotoGP in his second year, Alex Rins on the Suzuki bike, he was looking for his first win along with Zarco, and Cal Crutchlow, the Brit, who very aggressive, very fun to watch. So what you need to understand about MotoGP is that there was a 4-way battle for the lead this race, but that's every race for MotoGP. With Formula 1, we get a good race maybe every 6 or so races, like the Bahrain GP last weekend. Great race. Australia, a couple of weeks before that, sucked. Last year with F1, there was one standout race in Baku. There was a good one in Spa, Barcelona, but overall, the majority of races are pretty forgettable. With MotoGP, every race, there is a 4, 5, 6, 7-way battle for the lead. Qatar, the first round a few weeks ago, there was about 7 riders who could possibly have won that race. And in this race, there was 4. And with these bikes, they are some of the most skilled drivers in the world. They're constantly ducking and weaving in between each other. There's many, many lead changes a lap, and it was quite spectacular to watch. And while that was happening, Marc Marquez, who was, as I said, the fastest rider in the field, was charging back through the pack from 19th place. And he got into a few skirmishes, which you might have seen, which I'm going to get into more detail with. First was on Aleix Espargaro on the Aprilia bike. He went down the inside of him in one of the final corners, made contact, pushed him wide, and his penalty for that was he had to give a position back, which I imagine the stewards meant for him to give it back to Aleix Espargaro, but he'd already overtaken another 3 bikes since then, so he simply gave a position back to a rider he'd literally just overtaken the corner before he got the penalty, which was quite weird to see. So then he got on with the job. He got back into the top 10 pretty quickly, overtook his championship rival from last year, Andrea Dovizioso, on the Ducati, which I imagine was very disheartening. And then he caught up to Valentino Rossi, the 9-time famous world champion, and this is when the real drama happened. So those of you who watch this sport regularly know that Marquez is extremely aggressive. He's a 4-time world champion, which shows he knows how to consistently... He knows how to score points, but he's also not one to muck around. He definitely goes for the move whenever there's one on, but in this case with Valentino Rossi, I believe that there was not, in fact, a move on in that corner. He was a long way back, and he basically went for a gap that didn't exist. Valentino Rossi had already committed to the corner, and what ended up happening was similar with what happened with Marquez and Aleix Espargaro, but this time Marquez forced Rossi wide enough that he went onto the grass and fell off his bike, and he was raging. He was mad. And if some of the comments he said after the race, I think were a bit overdramatic. He claimed that Marquez was always out to get him and that he was ruining the sport, which is more heat of the moment stuff from Valentino. I think Marquez did go to apologise to him after the race, but he was waved out of the Yamaha team garage, which I think was a bit unnecessary. But Marquez definitely, the move wasn't on. He shouldn't have gone for it, and he quite rightly got a 30-second time penalty after the race, which dropped him back down to 18th, 19th. And so Marquez took 3 separate penalties during this race, which is pretty similar, if you watch Supercars, to what happened to Scott McLaughlin at the final round in Newcastle last year. So it was certainly dramatic to watch. Marquez is an interesting character. But by far the highlight of the race was the 4-way battle for the lead. Jack Miller held on for a surprising amount of laps, considering that his tyres seemed to have gone off way earlier than everyone else's. The Suzuki of Alex Rins was in second place for a long time. He had quite a few dives at the end of the long back straight at the Argentina circuit, but wasn't able to get the move done. However, Cal Crutchlow, who sat in 4th place for a lot of the time, he seemed to have saved his tyres the best. He first overtook Johan Zarco, then Alex Rins, and got the move done on Jack Miller. Eventually, Rins and Miller dropped back. Miller made a mistake, which probably cost him a podium at the last corner, because towards the end of the race, all of their tyres were gone. Crutchlow and Zarco were fighting for the win with the last couple laps, overtaking each other, all that sort of stuff. With shot tyres, Crutchlow eventually took the win and the championship lead, which said a lot about how chaotic that race was. So basically the point of this video wasn't so much the focus on wrapping up the race, even though I did do that. This is pleading with you that if you're a motorsport fan and you just want to see a category with great racing, great drivers, and great amount of skill, you need to be watching MotoGP, because it is quite possibly providing the best racing of any category in the world at the moment. So that's pretty much it for this video today. I'll definitely be covering the rest of the MotoGP season, as well as F1 and Supercars and all that. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you do watch the next round of MotoGP. And until then, I'll catch you later.